Hello everybody, welcome to Fortuna Admissions webinar on writing powerful essays. I'm Caroline Diarte Edwards. I was Director of Admissions at INSEAD, and we also have Judith Silverman Hodara on the line, and Judith was Head of Admissions at the Wharton School of Business.
Good morning everybody, or good afternoon for some of you. Glad to have you with us.
So I see that people are just joining. We'll just wait for a few seconds as people come in, and then we'll start the presentation. Just a few housekeeping points. So the session is scheduled today for 45 minutes. We'll try to keep some time at the end of that for questions. So the presentation itself should last about 30-35 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes or so for questions. Please make sure that you're muted. When you join the session, you should be automatically muted. If you have any problems with the audio, and then please make sure that you're using a headset. Normally it works better with headset, or you can also dial in. There's a phone number that you can dial into the session. If you do have any further technical problems, then please send a message in the chat box. You should be able to see a control panel on the right-hand side where there's a chat box, and you can send a message to the organizers. My colleague Melissa Jones is on the line. She'll be able to respond to your questions there. If you have a question that you'd like us to answer at the end of the session, please enter your question any time during the session into the question box. If you look on the right-hand side on the control panel, there's a drop-down menu for entering questions. So feel free to type in your question at any point, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can at the end of the session. Okay, so we'll make a start. So first of all, a few words of introduction about Fortuna Admissions. So Fortuna Admissions is a firm set up by a team of ex-admissions directors from top schools. The team have credentials across a range of schools, top schools from the US and internationally, as you can see on the screen there. We set up Fortuna Admissions 4 years ago, really with the aim of bringing a different level and different quality of guidance to candidates, recognizing that people with experience of working behind the closed doors of admissions offices really have a different level of insight into how the decisions are taken and how you can best present your candidacy. And so we have a team of coaches and directors across the world who work with candidates for all of the top schools. So today we're going to focus on essay writing. The topics that we'll cover, we'll talk about how admissions use the essays, what role the essays play in the overall evaluation process. We'll run through some tips on tackling the essays and how to get started. We'll give you some insight into the typical mistakes that we've seen candidates make as when we were in the admissions office, and mistakes that candidates applying to our schools have made, so you can avoid those pitfalls yourselves. We'll talk about then some typical questions that you will likely come across when you're applying to business school. So there are a number of themes that are typically addressed in business school essay questions. So one theme that comes up repeatedly is introduce yourself, those types of questions. You'll often have questions about your career goals. You'll have questions about your motivation for applying to the school, and then most schools have an optional essay. So we'll go through each of those and then talk about the best way of tackling those types of questions, and then we'll get to the Q&A at the end. All right, so I'll pass over to Judith for the role that the essays play in the admissions process.
So thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here to talk a little bit about essays. And when I was at Wharton, this to me was the most exciting part of the application to read. It really is the part that is very organic. You know, your application has, your details have already been completed. Your resume is finished. Your undergraduate GPA, your GMAT, for example, are all set in stone. And in that essay, you're allowed to and encouraged to really talk about what matters to you. As Caroline has suggested in this slide, you're going to give some context and connect the dots. How did you get from A to B to C? What was it that encouraged you to take this kind of role in a certain industry? How did you decide that you wanted to go to business school? So if you imagine sitting down and explaining this to someone in a very kind of informal and engaged manner, that is really what the admissions officers are looking for. The essays allow us as admissions officers, or I should say them at this point, to really understand where you're coming from and how you see yourself in the context of that particular school and how it is that you're going to be able to impact that community. So as you're working on the essays, and they do seem, you know, like it's a lot of work and a lot of thought that goes into it, but your voice really comes through and your personality is going to just be evident throughout those entire 500 or 600 words. I certainly recommend that there are messages that you're going to be repeating, so you may start with a theme and then follow it up throughout the course of that essay and wrap it all up at the end. I would say that the most important parts of that application essay are going to be the beginning, where you really explain what you're doing here, where you came from, and how you got here. And then, again, at a midpoint, explaining why it is that the school is a specific fit for you, what are you bringing to that environment. And then at the end, when you're wrapping it up and you're giving the admissions officer something to go away with. One thing that I frequently would say to the students that I knew when I was in admissions was you really want to give the admissions directors something to talk about in that committee meeting. So you want to be memorable, but you also want to give them enough detail so that as they talk about your application, they can say, oh, that girl who talked about XYZ in her essay, or that guy who would really like to do renewable energy in China. And to us, you know, in admissions, this essay and really carving out how it is that you present yourself is going to be so critical within the context of the application process. And I'm going to pass it to Caroline to talk a little bit about some of the tips and how to go about this process.
Thank you, Judith. Yes, so thinking about how do you get started with your essays, and it can be an intimidating process and hard to know just how to get the ball rolling. We suggest that before you dive into writing, you should really take a step back and think about your story and what has brought you to where you are today. Think about what are the key messages that you might want to convey to the school. Think about your strengths and weaknesses. Think about, you know, the key turning points in your life that have brought you where you are today. And some of that reflection will be very useful groundwork when you get to actually working and refining on your essays later. Then when you're ready to start working on your essays, review the full set of questions and review the entire application, because sometimes you'll find that there are almost mini essays that are embedded in the application form. And you need to make sure that you're conveying your overall story effectively and you're not repeating information in different places. So do actually, you know, review all of the essay questions and the full application form before you start to think about what are you going to say and where are you going to say it. When you start writing, we suggest that you work on a bullet point version first. It's useful to have an outline so that you can start to think about, you know, how does this story come together? What are your key points? And where are you going to convey those points, and which examples are you going to use, and where do those examples fit in the application? Sometimes it can be hard to actually you know, think about those key points if you just dive into the full write-up straight away. So doing a sort of outline version and reviewing that at a high level before you then start the full write-up is a very useful way of structuring the process. If you've already submitted an application elsewhere or you've already prepared essays for another school, and we would discourage you from copying and pasting essays, it's really important to take a fresh approach with each school and convey, you know, what is your fit with that specific school. Sometimes, of course, you know, you can use the same key messages in essays with different schools, but try to avoid copying and pasting essays, and file readers are very good at picking up on that, and when an essay is really not specifically written for that school. File readers are very attuned to that, so just be careful about trying to do that too fast. Show a logical flow to your path. So the school wants to understand your story overall, and they want to understand, you know, where have you come from and where are you heading. They want to see that there's a theme, that you have interests that you've pursued and that you've pursued them over time, both in your professional life and in your personal life, and that helps to build a clear picture of who you are and where you're heading. Standing out is important. You need to think about, you know, how you can convey your own unique voice. It's good to be different, but don't be weird. We've certainly seen applications ourselves where candidates have said inappropriate things or tried to say things in a, you know, perhaps in a funny way, but it's kind of fallen flat. So it's good to be authentic. It's important to be authentic, but it's always useful to also get a second set of eyes and make sure that what you've written reads well to an outsider. Be passionate. The school wants to see enthusiasm. They want to see enthusiasm about what you plan to do in the future and about your place at that school. And remember that, you know, file readers are humans too. They really warm to candidates who convey genuine enthusiasm for the school and really show a very personal side to themselves. So don't be afraid to show that. Sometimes in the essays, candidates make the mistake of being too dry, too professional in their approach. Of course, you want to be professional, but also show a personal side to yourself and show the human side. And file readers will warm to that, and they are trying to get to know you as an individual beyond just your professional accomplishments. So don't be afraid to show that personal side as well, and that will serve you very well. So when you get to finalizing your essays, take a step back and just review everything again and review the essay titles and just make sure you've answered everything. Judith and I have read many questions or many responses where candidates have answered a part of the question and they've totally forgotten to answer another part of the question. Many essay questions are multi-part. So just be careful that you have been complete and addressed everything that the school is looking for. When you review your essays, look for repetition. You don't want to, for example, be citing exactly the same examples in your essays as you highlight in your resume, or perhaps a story that is highlighted by your recommender. You don't want to use exactly the same example in your essays, potentially. So try to be careful about too much repetition. Reinforcement can be useful, however. So you know, if you give an example in your resume of a key project, and you describe that briefly, and then the recommender elaborates on that and talks about what you achieved in more detail, then that can be useful. That will actually sort of reinforce the credibility of what you've said, but just be careful to make sure that you're not repeating exactly the same stories and examples across different parts of your application. And do try to stick to the word limit. We know it's very hard, and often the essays seem to have got shorter and shorter overall as the years have progressed, and that's actually, you know, at first glance that can seem like a good thing, but actually what we see is that clients sometimes struggle with this because you're trying to get your whole story across in fewer words, and that's very tough. INSEAD has an essay, which we'll talk about in a minute, where you have to describe yourself in 500 words. That's a page. It's very difficult to describe yourself in 500 words. There's probably so many things that you could say. But do be respectful of the limits, because the file readers have a lot to get through, and they appreciate it if you can be concise. And if you do run over too much, then it's likely to count against you. Review all the essays in the application together, so that you can check at the end whether you're really conveying a holistic perspective of who you are, and getting your key messages across effectively. Remember that the essays do not stand alone. They are very much part of the overall application, and they will be reviewed at the same time as the online form, the resumes, the recommendation letters, and then at the end of the process, the interview report as well. So make sure that the different pieces of the puzzle are complementary and work together rather than against each other, or rather than repeating each other. At this stage of the process, it's really useful and important to get a second set of eyes. It could be hard, when you've been writing your essays and working on them often for many weeks or even months. It can be hard to see the wood for the trees at this stage, and to have any sense of how that will read to someone who's looking at it for the first time. So it's very important at that stage to get some review. And remember, as you're going through all parts of the application and going through the essays, that the file reader always has a key question in mind. What is this candidate bringing to this community? Sometimes I've seen candidates answer questions in a way that, they've given some nice information, but it's not particularly relevant to the school. It doesn't tell me much about what they're going to contribute to the classroom or what they're going to contribute to the school community. Remember, the file reader is always thinking about this. So in all of your questions and your responses, do keep that question in your mind as well. Over to you, Judith.
When I was at Wharton, and I know Caroline also had this experience, we saw a lot of common mistakes. And I wanted to share with you some of these things that may seem kind of obvious to you, but we've seen them enough that we thought it would be helpful to sort of talk about them and go through them one by one. The first major mistake, which may seem kind of obvious, is to not take the time to sit down and really understand what it is you're trying to do. Reflection doesn't happen overnight. You're not going to sit down on Saturday afternoon and say, hey, I'm going to reflect now on what I want to do and where I've been. It is a reiterative process and an iterative process, and it's one that goes on over a series of weeks. So if you're sitting in on this session and you're thinking about applying this fall, you know that some of the deadlines are early September, some of them are early October. Now is a great time to really begin that process and set aside some time to think about, where am I? How did I get here? What is an MBA going to bring me? What will I bring to an MBA? And where would I like to go after that? So take that time on your commute, perhaps. Bring a notepad with you, or when you've got some downtime, if you're waiting for a friend. This is the kind of thing that is very organic, and it certainly doesn't work just because you think, oh, now I'm going to be reflective. So it's a wonderful opportunity to sort of take stock. And I know that I've spoken with candidates and students alike that really appreciate that chance to really hit the pause button and say, okay, I'm 26, I'm 27, I'm 28, I'm 25. I went to college, I graduated, I got my first job or my second job. And what happens now? Where do I imagine myself when I'm 40 or 60? What kind of life do I envision for myself professionally and personally? So certainly taking that step back and allowing yourself that opportunity, not just sitting in and diving into, this is why I want to go to business school. The second most important thing you can do is get to know your schools. And I'm not talking about naming professors, and I'm not talking about rattling off a list of classes. It's really understanding the language and the ethos of the schools that you're applying to. So the finite differences between how are the groups called, clusters or cohorts, or sections, for example. What is the general feel of the school? You want to reach out, start your research, certainly on the website, plan a visit over the summer if you can, and get to know current students, recent alumni, and that's anywhere from 1 to 5 years out, and then alumni that are 20 years out. Because don't forget, you're not just thinking about what's going to happen immediately after you graduate, but where do you envision yourself in the long term? So LinkedIn, you know, or any other social vehicle that you might use is a wonderful way to connect. People approach graduates of these programs all the time for advice, for motivation, for a little mentoring, and it's never a bad thing. And I know that Caroline can attest to the fact that she gets phone calls and emails from people that went to INSEAD or interested in learning more about it, and that she can share that experience with them. And certainly in my graduate program, I talk to students all the time that are curious about, well, what happened when you graduated, and what happened now 15 years later? What are you doing? How'd you get there? So it's never a bother. You can put together a contact list pretty easily. Another thing that I'd like to point out is if you have a specific academic or extracurricular interest, current students are more than happy to talk to you about that. So if you think you'd like to join the hiking club, or you're interested in LGBTQ, or you're interested in students that want to spend time in China when they graduate, you know, there are all these different ways to really engage with the current community. And I like to, I'm going to make this sign, I like to make that community as small as possible. If you try to reach out to all 1,000 students in the program, it's going to be really difficult. But if you try to get a microcosm, you're going to find it a lot easier to do that research. As Caroline mentioned, you never want to cut and paste your essays. In addition to the fact that when I was at Wharton, we would get Harvard essays, we would get Stanford essays, and we would laugh and, you know, send it to the right place. It just feels different. The feeling of the school, the things that you're going to talk about, why you might want to go there, very, very different. And yes, certainly a lot of the top schools may offer something that's going to allow you to get to where you want to go, but they're going to do it very differently, and your role in that school is going to be quite different. So again, it's not like, oh, just run spell check and make sure that you didn't put GSB when you met HBS, but really to change the way that you engage and you're talking about yourself and you're talking about where you see yourself within the context of that school. So with that said, be authentic and true to yourself, and this is a big battle that we face now as advisors. Schools are not looking for you to be lockstep. There's no, this is the right way to do the HBS essay, this is the right way to do CBS or NCEAD or LBS. It is so important that your true self comes through. Sure, you want to refer back to the school and talk about what matters to you, but there is no form that, it's not like an exam where you're being checked off, did you make the following 6 points? It's really how much are you able to share about who you are and why this school is going to fit for you and where you see yourself going. So in reference to this point, trying to emulate a style that the school likes, there really is no set style. And I know it's very tempting to look online and find essays that have worked and essays that didn't work. And don't forget, a lot of the directors at these schools, there has been some turnover. GSB is fairly consistent. HBS has a new director. Wharton had a new director last year. There is turnover kind of in the senior and the junior ranks. So there's not any set, you must write like this in order to be admitted. The same thing goes for overworking and overthinking. We certainly suggest starting early, but there comes a time, it's almost like making bread. You know, if you knead it too much, it starts to get really sticky and it doesn't come out very well because you've overworked the yeast. And I think that it's important to know when you're done. And the more people you ask, the more advice you're going to get, and you're going to end up tearing this up many, many times over. So our suggestion is to not work in isolation, but you're also not asking 7 people what they think. So either you might work with an advisor, or you might work with a friend or 2, or a fiance or a wife or a husband that says, yes, this is heading in the right direction. This is true to who you are. Or, hey, I really don't understand that point about what you did with this particular opportunity. But I do really strongly advise, and a lot of people don't believe me, it's going to become a lot of white noise the more people you ask. So you want to make sure as much as possible you're keeping that circle pretty tight. 1, maybe 2 people at most that are giving you feedback. An important thing to start now for anybody at any stage is going to be the resume, and you want to make sure that it's reflective of where you've been thematically it links to your essays, and it doesn't necessarily have every single deal you worked on or every single organization in great detail, but you want to highlight the ones that are the most salient to your story. And if you find yourself interested in banking or interested in consulting or interested in nonprofit work, you want to make sure that the other supporting parts of that resume, which are, you know, sort of beyond that first current employment, really support that path. And I would go so far as to say some of you may have 5 or 6 things that you've done in college and after college. But if you find that they're really not all pointing in a direction that's going to support your main goal, you might decide to go with 4 things that you've done in college and after college. Filling it up doesn't necessarily, is not a necessity. And as far as you want to give the reader some blank space, and I can't really stress this enough, is that it's very, again, tempting to sort of fill in every single line, but it's hard. The readers are going through 20 or 30 applications a day, and I would say that giving them easy on the eyes is really important, and you do not need an objective at the top, by the way, but we can talk about that during another session, sort of how to work on your resume. And because you're on the session today, we are kind of assuming that you're already in process or thinking about being in process. You cannot do this the night before or the week before. You cannot take 2 weeks off in August and expect to get it in. Again, you're starting with the reflection. The essays take time. The resumes take time. And without a doubt, this whole mixture does not just happen 2 days before it's due. So giving yourself enough of an opportunity, building it into your schedule the same way you would build in a work appointment or going to the gym or meeting up with friends. Set aside, it doesn't have to be an hour a day, but it should be 4 to 5 hours a week at some point up until the deadlines that you find that you can dedicate and focus, turn off your email, and really just spend some time working through some of these issues, and certainly giving yourself the opportunity to do it thoughtfully and carefully. Caroline, we're going to talk about introduce yourself questions.
Thank you, Judith. Yeah, so we're going to run through some themes of questions, and one common theme that comes up is the introduce yourself type question. So, for example, Columbia asks what people will be pleasantly surprised to learn about you. INSEAD asks you to give a candid description of yourself. Stern asks you to describe yourself to your MBA classmates. So how to tackle these questions? As we said earlier, you know, it's important to take a step back and reflect on what is unique about your particular story. These essays are very useful context to your application overall. So it's a good way of sort of giving the backstory on who you are, where you've come from, and where you're heading. The rest of your application, it can be very sort of, you know, factually based, your resume, your academic achievements, and so on. You don't need to repeat those achievements in this essay. And in fact, sometimes candidates I've seen focus too much on describing their professional strengths and achievements in these types of introduce yourself essays. What schools are looking for here is a broader sense of who you are. So it's good to get a balance here, and you can talk about yourself in a professional context, but also talk about yourself in a personal context and tell the far reader a bit about, you know, who you are on a personal level, so they get a sense for you know, who you are beyond all of those other accomplishments. What drives you? What makes you tick? And you know, if you can convey that and really give an authentic sense of who you are, you'll get the far reader interested in your story, and that should really be your objective with this essay, is to draw the far reader in and make them want to get to know you more. And the way that they would get to know you better is of course to invite you to interview. So so give a sense of, you know, your breadth and also your depth. You have to really focus in on some key points in this essay. Another mistake that candidates sometimes make with these essays is trying to cover too much ground and trying to summarize all of the key points about them, their strengths, their weaknesses, their accomplishments in one page. And if you do that, you're going to end up staying at a very superficial level. So it's better to pick perhaps 3, 4, maybe 5 themes and go into some depth. That will be much more interesting to the file reader, and it can be hard to sort of figure out what are the key points you want to focus on, and that will take some time. It's often, this essay can take a great deal of time to get right. But if you do spend some time on it, often this type of essay is the most interesting part of the application for the file reader. And it will help them get a better sense of who you are and give really important color to your application overall. Over to you, Judith.
So I wanted to chat a little bit about the career goal questions, which is the other major question that are being asked. And you can see how Columbia asks it, how LBS asks it. Ross asks it very, very clearly. And also explain your decision to pursue a graduate education in management and explain the opportunities you'll pursue at Stanford. You know, these are all asking you to be really clear about how the school is going to fit you and how you see yourself moving forward. I wanted to mention that career management offices frequently sit in at the application decision. They want to make sure that you are going to be hireable after you graduate, right? They want you showing up as a positive number in their percentages. The worst thing a school can have is a class that doesn't have jobs when they graduate. So it's important to really be very clear. I would like to do this internship in this industry. Here are a couple of potential firms that would be interesting to me. This is where I see myself after I graduate. This is where I see myself in 10 years or 15 years. So now is a really good time to do some searching and to find out things that maybe you didn't even know existed. We're going through that now with a lot of our clients that are thinking about distinctive paths and say, hey, you know, this hadn't occurred to me, but I see this job description and it's really interesting. Or this kind of company, which is doing amazing things in a part of the world that I'm interested in, maybe that's something that I can pursue. So reflecting back on, you know, what your dreams are, and also pragmatically speaking, how are you going to get there? And how is the school going to allow you and encourage you and support you? So it may be specific classes that you're going to take that are going to help you to, you know, to make that transition if you're a career changer. Specific professors, or working with an entrepreneur in residence for those of you that are thinking about starting your own business after you graduate. Opportunities to take master classes, field trips, study abroad experiences. So all of these things that are part of what the school offers and should be really joined like this to what it is you see yourself doing on a professional level. One additional note I wanted to add is that your life is not just comprised of what job you have and what professional track you choose. So it's completely appropriate to say, I envision myself being engaged in the community, or I see myself taking my skills and using them in a wider context, because the schools are interested not only in what are you going to do, but how are you going to be a part of their organizations and alumni organizations as you move forward, and also impact the greater society. So that is clearly, and you know, Stanford's message is pretty clear in how they ask it. And certainly Wharton has added another question this year. So there's lots of different ways that they're kind of getting at the same information. I would also advise you, this is a really difficult essay to write, but once you write it, you're going to find that you can use it in a lot of different ways. So what do you want to do and why and how at our school, again, can be massaged and may in fact be the first essay question you start with. Because once you sort of nail that message down, that is the messaging that you're going to be using for your interactions with the school. You'll be using it during your interviews. You'll be using it with discussions with alumni. And perhaps if you can boil down, you know, this is going to be a very, very important nugget that you will be able to use in many different ways throughout your application process.
So moving on to questions about your motivation for applying to the school, and before we dive into this, just wanted to mention as well that some of these questions you might find that for a specific school that you're applying to, you don't have to answer this specific question in the essays, but all of these questions will be relevant to your interviews. So, for example, I work a lot with candidates applying to INSEAD. INSEAD used to have a question about why you're applying to INSEAD in the essays, and they've taken that out to shorten the written application. But they've shifted the focus of the evaluation of the candidate's motivation to the interviews. So all of these are core questions that the school will need to evaluate as part of your the evaluation of your candidacy. So even if you find that you don't actually have to write this down on paper for the essays, they're all important questions for you to be considering because it's important preparation also for the interviews. So schools that ask about your motivation for the school, you can see here on the screen, you know, all of the schools want to see that you have clear motivation and that you've made a conscious choice to apply to that school, and you have to make them all feel, in fact, that they are your #1 choice. And it might be a bit of an artificial exercise because in reality you are likely applying to, hopefully applying to more than one school. Mm-hmm. But you do need to go through the process of figuring out, you know, what is your fit with a school, and how are you going to convey that. So this is something that requires quite significant research, and a mistake that we sometimes see candidates make is that they will sort of try to shortcut this process and swat up a bit about the school just before applying or just before the interviews, having pretty much taken the decision to apply to a school based on rankings or based on advice from friends or family or colleagues. An MBA program is a very complex proposition. There's a lot to take into account. There are differences in the curriculum, in the core curriculum, in the elective curriculum, in the projects that you can undertake, in the composition of the student body, the size of the student body, the nature of the alumni community, the career opportunities. There's a huge amount to take into account. So you do need to get to grips with this before really you decide where you want to apply. And all of that research will pay off. What we see is that candidates who've invested significant effort over time in this research actually end up being much better candidates, even if they don't have to explicitly write about why I'm a great fit for this particular school in the essay. If they've done that research in the written application, they will come across as a better fit because they'll have a better sense for what the school, what the school's values are, what the school's mission is about, and how they fit in that context. And therefore, what are the key messages that the candidate needs to convey. So, you know, the research that you should be doing, I mean, of course, there's a lot of stuff that you can do online now. If at all possible, do visit the school. A lot of the schools will be doing online events or physical events in different cities and different countries around the world. Do some research on LinkedIn and see who you can identify in your network or in the network of your network who are members of the alumni community or perhaps current students. You can also reach out to the school directly and for example, if you're particularly passionate about some club that you want to join at the school, then reach out to that student club, reach out to the president and see if you can get some more information and see how you could engage. In your application, don't just sort of give a laundry list of examples of, you know, here are the courses I want to take and here are the projects I want to do and here are the clubs I'm going to join. Make a clear link to your story. So it's better to give fewer examples but make them real and make it genuine and show how that is, those things that you're mentioning are things that you're really passionate about and that fit with what you've done so far and therefore how you can contribute and fit with where you're heading in the future. Over to you, Judith.
Certainly a lot of the schools are going to be asking you questions about achievements, and you can see a couple of different ways that you're being asked about this. What are you most proud about outside your professional life? I actually really like this question because, as I was mentioning earlier, you don't always get the opportunity to talk about things that matter to you outside of what you do every day for a living. So it certainly I'm just going to go back for one moment to the slide right before,
yeah.
and talk a little bit, and you can see how MIT is asking it, Kellogg, they're all kind of explaining to you what matters to them. So MIT is really curious about how did you overcome this problem that you had? What hurdles did you encounter, which to me indicates that they're really interested in problem solving. Leadership and teamwork, as you can see. I mean, Kellogg kind of lays it out there. This is what is important to them. And they, interestingly, want to know, as you'll see this, what did you learn? That is probably the most important question that's being asked by any admissions office today. They want to understand, what did you learn? Can you still learn? And I was talking with a student this morning, and I said, they don't want you to be perfect. They don't expect you to have all the answers. And if you did, you wouldn't be going to business school, right? So you're going to spend a year and a half, 2 years in this process of continuing to self-educate, to learn from your peers, to learn from your professors. And this question, what did you learn, is a way for the schools to understand how did you grow as a result of what might not have been a great experience. And I wanted to sort of walk you through how do you discuss this in those essays. So we're going to look at, some examples. You certainly want to choose something from the last 2 or 3 years. I don't personally think you need to go back to college. The one caveat is, for those of you that are recent graduates, very recent, or you're still in college and you're thinking about a 2+2 program at GSB or HBS, certainly at that point you can go back to sophomore year and talk about a leadership moment. But this is a great way for you to really look at a professional achievement over the past 2 to 3 years. It doesn't have to be the time that you were the leader or that you were the star. Again, some of these questions are framed to really understand, how did you get through a situation? How are you achieving? Maybe you didn't have the presidency or the co-chair position. How are you able to effectively change the organization or the task or the project that you were working on? Not surprisingly, and all of you consultants will love this, we're looking at the STAR model, where you're going to talk about the overall situation. So what was going on? What was the project? What were you looking at as a task? What did you do? So what was your role? And a word on this, admissions officers are a lot more concerned about verbs than they are about nouns. And I say this for those of you that work on very complex deals, or those of you that are involved in very complex engineering or manufacturing. The fact that you did, or you took, you motivated, or you instigated, or you created is much more important than the noun or the size of the deal or how many widgets you created. Does that make sense? So I want to make it clear that, imagine, yes, admissions officers are schooled in all these different industries, but the action, the verb, is much more important in this situation and on your resume than the actual noun that might have been affected as a result. And what impact did this have? Again, think about it very broadly, on your colleagues, on the culture of the organization. Certainly, for those of you with bottom lines, that's going to be important. What did you learn? So at Wharton, we used to say, what is the takeaway? And that is the thing that sometimes people will peter out at the end of the essay. And they'll stick it, and there's the last 2 sentences, and you'll stick it in at the end. And it shouldn't wait until the end to show what you learned. These discussions do not need to be chronological. So you could find a way to sort of talk about the growth and understanding and self-awareness and what did you learn throughout the course of the essay. And again, just reflecting back on my own experiences, sometimes students get really tied up in the storytelling, and they do the STA. The R, again, it kind of gets thrown on there. I would almost encourage you, when you're drafting this thing, to look at the R first and then back in the story that got you to that result, which may be another way to kind of flip it on its head and really get you thinking about the part that, in my experience, doesn't get as much airtime as it deserves.
Okay, a few words about optional essays. And your strategy here may depend on the school. So some schools now have very few essays and include an optional essay, and therefore that space can be very important. schools that have more essays, you might not need to use that space. And certainly, if you don't have anything that's really important to convey to the school in the optional essay, just leave it blank. That's absolutely fine. This is a good space to address a concern that the school might have about your profile. So if you have some weakness in your academic background, a low GPA or a weak GMAT, and you can address that and sort of explain the circumstances, then this is a good place to do that. Don't use the essay, the optional essay, just as an overflow from elsewhere. I've often seen candidates do that, and it unfortunately just winds up the file really. You need to be concise in the essays, keep to the word count, and get to the point. And if you're going to use the optional essay, then use it to address something else that you haven't had the opportunity to address elsewhere in the application. If you're looking at this essay for a school where otherwise the application is fairly short and there aren't many other essays, this can be a really important space to highlight an additional aspect of your profile that you feel is an important part of your story and you haven't been able to highlight elsewhere. So maybe then it's up to you. And you know, your scope here is very wide. You can pick a professional achievement, you can pick a personal achievement, you can pick something, you can tell a story about something that, you know, that's happening in your background that has really had an impact in shaping who you are today and gives the school a better sense of who you are. So feel free to use this in the way that you feel sort of best reflects your candidacy overall. So we're going to take a few questions in a minute. I know that we'd scheduled 45 minutes, so some of you may need to sign off. If you do, we'll send around the recording, so if you want to listen to the Q&A later, you'll be able to do so. If we're not able to answer your questions and you'd like to have a further discussion, please do sign up for a free consultation on our website. And you can also join us for another webinar at the end of July, where we'll be talking specifically about developing a resume for business school. And we also have an event coming up in New York on July 16th, where we have a one-day intensive workshop on preparing your application. Further details are on our website, so please do check that out. So for those of you who can stay on for a few minutes, we'd be very happy to take some questions. Melissa, can you read out some of the questions? Are you with us, Melissa? All right, so Melissa has passed on one question. Someone had asked, what does it mean to be passionate and humans respond to enthusiasm? So what I'm trying to get at here is that sometimes candidates use a very dry style, and it doesn't really give a sense of who they are as an individual. And you want to try and, as you said, you know, be authentic, give a sense of who you are. The school is trying to get to know you, not just in terms of your personal, in terms of your professional and academic accomplishments. Of course, those are very, very important. But they're trying to get a sense of your personality as well. So don't be afraid of letting that shine through. And also, you know, schools want to choose candidates who are going to be enthusiastic about the program, of course. So showing enthusiasm for your career, showing enthusiasm and passion for the school is very important. You know, given that schools have so many candidates to choose from, they're definitely going to give priority to candidates who they feel are going to place the greatest value on the experience of the MBA at that school.
I wanted to address a question that I frequently get about how to use the optional essay, and I just saw that question come through to me. Essentially, you don't want there to be anything that the admissions officers are wondering about. So it's not the time to say, I really, really, really want to go to Columbia, or I really want to go to Booth. But it is the time to say, I had a really rough second semester of my third year at University of Illinois, and this is why. Or my GMAT score, despite the fact that I took it 3 times, is not indicative of my ability. I'm currently enrolled in a calculus class, UC Berkeley Online, and my reference talks about that within their letter of recommendation. Or I felt it was important that you understood why I took a year off in between graduating and my first position. I was offered a job that started in January, and I took 6 months to learn Italian living in Rome. So it doesn't need to be a long, whole story. It can be very succinct, 2 sentences maybe, 3 sentences on whatever it is you want to discuss. And I wouldn't be so concerned about, does this all need to fit together? You could basically say, here are a few points I'd like to make that may not be clear within the context of my trajectory. Freshman year, GMAT, gap in the experience, so again, that optional essay. Now, to be clear, to Caroline's point, there are some schools that say, is there anything else we need to know? Or is there anything else about your candidacy that you think is important for us to share? And you want to be sure that you read those words very carefully, because again, some schools are actually looking for sort of another mini essay, and some schools really just want to know what was going on. I cannot underscore this enough. If you crashed the car, you need to tell the admissions directors. It's not like ignoring it is going to make it go away. And if you don't say anything, they're pretty much going to they're going to sort of think like something untoward was going on, or there's an explanation that doesn't make any sense. So don't ignore things in your background. I would certainly tell you to just explain it briefly and move on. Okay. I see a couple of other questions that came in.
Yeah. So we've got one question: what is something that is strictly best left for the letter of recommendation and not the essay? And how can we think about making the two complement each other? Yeah, interesting question about what is best left for the recommendation letter rather than the essays. I think that what the school is looking to get from the recommendation is obviously an outside perspective, but also comparison of how you work versus your peers, and that's not something that you can necessarily convey yourself. If you're talking about your accomplishments yourself, you need to describe it in quite a factual way. The recommender has much more scope to heap praise on you. All right, it can be hard to blow your own trumpet. You need to blow your own trumpet to a certain extent in your application. You certainly shouldn't be too shy about conveying, your strengths and your accomplishments. But the recommender has much more scope to really say, how fantastic you are, what you've achieved and how impressive that is versus what they would expect of someone at your level. So I think that's probably the key difference in, how the letter of recommendation should be tackled in terms of the content versus the essays. Judith, anything else that you would say about that?
No, I just think that this also really encourages you to reach out to your recommenders and have a sit down with them and talk about what you're going to talk about and talk about what you need them to talk about. I mean, I think sometimes this is another topic, but students don't always recognize that they can really have input on those recommendation letters, that it's not a black box. You have the opportunity to sort of say, hey, thanks for writing me the letter. This is what I could really use your help on. I'm talking about A, B, and C. I would love you to focus on D, E, and F, and here are some examples to use. So certainly thinking about how you can best manage your recommenders is going to be part of this conversation. I got a question that just came in about writing an essay about your YMBA and your post-MBA goals. The question is it better to start with a story and then conclude with the goals? I'm not sure if your question is about should I tell a story or where should I put my goals. To me, you can start with a story. You could start with a statement. You can start with, I would like to do this in my life. So there's no way to sort of say this is the order that it should go in. But I've seen students be very successful with those components. I believe that I would like to do this. I have this experience when I was 7 that impacted what I'm doing now. So these are all different vehicles, if you will, to sort of get to how did I end up in advertising? Why do I think that Ross is a great place for me to go? What do I want to do next? So, yes, stories certainly help, but it doesn't always have to be the first thing that you are using. You could, talk about other parts of ultimately I would like to do this in 15 years, and then you could back in the next, the other way. So again, lots of different moving pieces in the essay, but I think the question was more about, like, are these things that should be included? And I would say yes, you can certainly use them as part of your presentation.
We'll take one final question. So we have a question on fairly open essay titles, such as the one for Harvard Business School. And the question is, how should the essay be structured with regard to highlighting career goals or interest in HBS, the story, etc.? Yes, I mean, it can be tricky to tackle those very open questions, and there's a number of approaches you could take. So there is no specific formula really for those questions. You can take a number of approaches. So yes, you could focus the essay on your career goals. If you have particularly interesting career goals, and it's something that is worth devoting some space to. If it's something that's going to make you stand out, you may want to use that space to highlight an accomplishment, or you may want to use that space to highlight some aspects of your life story to date. It can vary a lot. There's no specific best topic for that essay. It really depends on your own individual story and what is going to make you stand out versus the candidates that you're going to be compared with. Judith, I know that you work a lot with candidates applying to HBS, so any other further comments on that question specifically?
Well, I think the fact that it is pretty open-ended shows that Harvard is clear about what they already know about you. So this is really the opportunity to go into a little bit more depth. It's not a great time to repeat your resume, and certainly, the story is going to be a pivotal part. What are you doing here? What brought you to this time? I think that with the Harvard director being new this year, I think that there is going to be a little bit more, I guess, wiggle room as far as what's coming across, and I think the question is, how are you structuring this? I don't think that he's necessarily going to have, like, it must have this, and it must have this, and it must have this. But one thing's for sure, it should be the essay that you are only sending to Harvard. I think it's going to sound different than the other schools that you're looking at. And I do believe that as you sit down and you start to brainstorm, there are going to be pieces that are going to become very evident to you as needing to be a part of this essay, and making sure that it's clear to them that this is your Harvard story. This is not a story that is then going to be showing up in other schools as well. And I think that we are almost out of time. I know, Caroline, you have a couple of housekeeping things that you might want to mention.
Yes. So please do follow up with us. Melissa has just posted in the chat box the website link. Please do sign up for a free consultation or contact us on email for any further questions, and we'd be very happy to discuss your profiles individually. And then we'll also send out the link to this session if you'd like to, if you've missed part of it and would like to listen to the recording. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you found it useful, and do sign up for our future sessions, and we look forward to being in touch. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.